Welcome to Some Stutter,
Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast
about communicating differently.
I'm Paul.
I'm Laura.
I'm Greg, and I'm a person who stutters.
On today's episode, we invited Lissette Jacobson and Maurice McDavid. And today's episode is a bit different than what we have normally done. We've kind of focused a lot on people who stutter and people with speech and language disabilities. But today we are branching out in a new way. Lissette and Maurice, they've written a book called Your Words Are Fire. And the subtitle of the book is 10 Culturally Responsive Teaching Strategies to Speak the Language of Belonging and Help Students Learn, Express Ideas, and Solve Problems. Our guests today are teachers, primarily interested in how to liberate bilingualism in the classroom for societal good. This has a long history in the United States, where back in the 1970s, kids at a school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, the Martin Luther King Elementary School in Ann Arbor, who were denied their educational rights because they were speakers of African American English. So the teachers at the school failed to teach them how to read because they weren't using their home language, African American English, to help them read.
It's interesting. Listening to this conversation, because Lissette and Maurice had a guest on their podcast, which is Black Brown Bilingual, and it was speech language pathologist Wada Farah, and she talked about, I guess, in sense, othering, but she explained the difference between language violence versus physical violence. And othering, she explained language violence as being othering. You use language to others, other people who are from different cultures, different accents, different ethnic group, to make them feel less than. So that's the first time I ever heard language of violence versus physical violence. And the language of violence can be so, so challenging.
Yeah. And the opposite of linguistic violence or language violence would be linguistic care, right? Providing opportunities for people who speak differently to be welcome, to be included in within society.
I would love to do a whole episode on that, actually. Examples of intentional inclusivity in conversations, in language, and in other speaking opportunities.
For sure. Yeah. Because I think it's an underutilized term. Like, we don't talk about linguistic care or language care the same way we do talk about self-care. Self-care is maybe a general, a broad term, but in very specific ways, we may feel left out. We may feel marked by our style of speech, the way we sound, if we stutter. But those can all be managed. Those can all be cared for. People can be cared for regardless of how they sound. And
and ideally, part of our audience will also be people who care for people who stutter, not just people who stutter themselves or who have communication challenges. And in the story that I'm telling myself, I imagine that there are a lot of people who want to do better but don't know how. If I am friends with someone and they are having a terrible time on a block, is it best for me to sit still and listen? Is it best for me to show empathy on my face? Is it best for me to pretend that I don't notice it's happening? Is it best for me to say the word for them so that we can move on? a lot of people may not know how they can show care
Yeah.
linguistically.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you know, it's you know, and many people, you know, people may also feel very uncomfortable showing care. They're not used to showing care,
That's true.
or you know how to do it. And also, as you're saying, Laura, they may feel embarrassed to ask the question, "What can I do to help you?" You know, it's like, you know, that's a hard question for a lot of people to ask. No, they prefer to stay in the mindset of being uncomfortable, and then making a person who is othered even more, feeling more othered. You know, Laura asked an interesting $64 question, Laura, because when you both were talking about language of care and speech like a language pathologist treating clients. I wonder if now the question is, would an SLP correct the accent?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the SLP.
I think it would depend on their training and formation as well.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
know one of the studies that I have a paper forthcoming, and in that paper we look at how lack of training can result in some skewed results actually for audiological assessments. Because if you're having your hearing assessed for speech and noise, and these assessments typically come with instructions that say repeat exactly what you heard. And if what you repeat is influenced by your dialect and the person who is doing the audiological assessment counts your answer as wrong when what actually happened was like an accent feature,
Because you
then
might
of course
say
that,
mutter instead of mother, right?
right, if
Mm-hmm.
you say mutter instead of mother and the person says, oh, well, they must have heard mutter, this is an incorrect response. They, and now you've done less well on this audiological assessment. And so we're just looking into that in a preliminary way, about how the dialect mismatch can interact, but also the dialect mismatch between the clinician and the participant is
Mm-hmm.
potentially too.
I mean, this also falls in line with the accents of Newfoundlanders. We definitely have an accent here, like ham and eggs. When trying to say ham and eggs, we say ham and eggs. You know, you see, I mean, their whole work, as Lissette, said towards the end of the interview, is that they're giving a voice to the voiceless, and there's quite the nugget there. And she said, if anyone gets one nugget from this conversation or their work, it really helps. So so all their efforts is to get voice to the voiceless.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I do know that, like, I'm a sitting member on the board for Canadian Parents for French, and we have a lot of issues confronting myths
Yeah.
about people putting their kids in French immersion, about like the deficits that they think their kids are going to come out with, or just you name it, and people think it. And a lot of really educated people too, teachers, people who should know better, don't. I guess they don't.
Yeah.
They don't. But like
Yeah.
bilingualism and dialectalism, I think like both of these things are important and things that get people found in othering situations. Like this affects, things like housing, employment,
Yeah. Sure.
education, like you name it.
So this is kind of the basis of their book.
Well, let's listen to them, check it out. And if you're listening, please like this video, use the share button, and subscribe so you don't miss any of the awesome content that we've got coming up.
So who is the book for? Is it for teachers, academics, families, and students? So how does your book incorporate these areas?
We really set out to take really abstract, theoretical, and philosophical content and presented in a way that was very concrete and tangible for all educators, right? So we envision this pairing nicely with pre-teacher education and like university and colleges. We also envision using, I meant to say pre-service teachers, that's what I was looking for. So we envision it, pre-service teachers using it at the university level, district leaders and teachers. And so it really does cover, I think, and it is applicable to a wide audience. Mm-hmm. Yes. And I want to add one more thing. We do also include a lot about ourselves, even our own childhood and lived experiences, because there was a specific moment where Maurice and I were having a discussion, and it kind of dawned on us that, a lot of the research we were reading about language learners were about people or students that were like Maurice and me. And so we were like, why are we not using our own voices instead of letting someone else speak on our behalf? And oftentimes when these research findings are shared, the very people that are being studied aren't in the room to hear the results, the conclusions, possible action steps. And so we really try to stay authentic and really also use our own stories to move the work forward. And we also will be releasing a listening guide to accompany it. And so we feel like as educators and practitioners, it's important to have that guided reflection as you go through the chapters. And so we are also looking forward to having that listening guide. And so we envision school leaders being able to use it as like ongoing professional development, and even teachers can use it as a point of self-reflection.
If academics need some further clarification support, will you both be available to assist, or is it strictly based on the book?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we mentioned, or that you mentioned in the bios, is just that we do have a consulting company that we work through called CIMA. CIMA is the Spanish word for mountaintop, and so we really kind of liked some of the plays on that. But culture, identity, and multilingual advocacy, and so we are certainly able to get out and do some work with that. And as people are making their way through this book, well, another part of each chapter is there's kind of a vignette, right? A storytelling piece of it, of here's how this worked in action. And so we're able to come, though, and I think then bring some of that. And so, yeah, people can reach out to us through that website and or social media or whatever it may be. And we've been able to work with several different districts across a couple different states. So.
Excellent. Now, where did the name of the title come from? I mean, this is a great title. I love the title. Plus the graphics as well is fabulous.
Oh, thank you so much. This is something we kept going back and forth about. And so for me, Maurice and I had kind of our own interpretations, right? But for me, when you think about fire is transformative, right? But it does two things. It can give life, right? It keeps us warm. It can help us cook. So it provides sustenance. Whereas on the flip side, fire can cause damage and cause harm. And so in that same way, words can either sustain and uplift or really tear someone down and really radically change. So anything that fire touches, it changes. And it's up to us to really think about, are we going to change for the better, or are we going to cause harm?
Beautiful. That's lovely. Yeah.
Well said.
Definitely well said, Lucy.
There is a slang term, you might say, oh man, hey, that song right there is fire, right? And so to say that something is fire means it's hot, it's cool, it's right, which is funny. It's hot, it's cool.
It's cool.
It's true, right? Funny.
But really the ability for language to be so many different things, one word having all of these multiple meanings, right? We really liked that idea too of like, that young people might read this and hear one thing, whereas somebody older might read it and hear another thing. And so we feel a little bit like there's some potential down the road, because we didn't hit it as much in this book, for us to really talk about youth language, right? And youth culture as a language in and of itself, and how that shows up in different places. But at any rate, yeah, I think the feedback has really been a very positive.
Okay. Now, as you know that I sent you both a lot of questions that the team developed. So I'll start asking a few of these questions. Would that be okay?
Sounds
Yes.
good.
Yeah, because the team would be would be very upset with me if I don't ask at least a few of them. Okay, so how do you see the additional layer of linguistic differences, like stuttering, complicating and deepening experiences of marginalization?
This question hits close to home because growing up, I have a friend who stutters. And he also was a bilingual or an English language learner. And I saw firsthand the additional, I don't want to say bullying, but just some of the ridicule that he experienced from within his own community, I think is something that is not talked about often. I think there's a real need to raise some awareness of what stuttering is, because I think within especially the Spanish speaking community, there's just a lot of misinformation. And I remember seeing his very loving mother attempt to support him, but it was actually worsening his anxiety and the stress. And so the more that she tried to support him, the more he would stutter. And so I remember him just becoming, as he got older, becoming much more withdrawn and much more quiet. But music would help him gain some freedom because he loved music and he loved to sing. And his fluency, what his family was chasing, really would shine through music. But I now, as I'm older and I have a different level of consciousness, I realize how sad, because he had his own cadence. It was his own way of speaking, and it's just as worthy and valuable. And he still was a great human being, and it does not correlate with lower cognitive abilities, right? I think sometimes even in a school setting, we do the read alouds, right, where the kids take turns in reading out loud, and that is such torture for students who stutter. And I think it is such a huge area that we don't realize. And unfortunately, I've seen educators and students alike really being the reason why so many students who stutter in school struggle.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So, and then just again, that additional layer of not only am I a person of color, my parents are immigrants, and they, also don't have the awareness. That intersection in and of itself really impacts, the resources that were available to him.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add too, I think a lot of this, particularly in the United States of America, comes back to how we view time, right? And so part of how we view time is we have an expression, time is money. And so if someone requires more time to communicate with, that's not always something people are willing to give. There is a lack of patience, right? Mm-hmm. Because, well, I could be doing something else, and so I remember, again, similarly, Lissette had a student who stuttered, I'm sorry, not a student, a peer growing up who stuttered and kids would yell things like "spit it out" or "hurry up" or
Right, right.
all of those things, which of course we know actually have the ability then to create more of that angst, and then can sometimes cause those students to fall silent, because I'd rather say nothing than to try to communicate what I'm saying and then be ridiculed for it. Go ahead, Lissette.
Yeah, additionally, you made me think about something, Maurice, with that comment. When we have newcomers, right, who enter our school systems who may speak another language and have yet to develop English proficiency, I have heard a lot of people saying like, "Oh, this child has no language," and so that again is coming in from a deficit standpoint. And so I think that what English learners or bilingual learners encounter in terms of maybe lower expectations or people thinking you know less are some of the same things that students who stutter have to grapple with, right? Perhaps teachers who think that they are not as capable, or people equating it to just, like I said, lower IQ or intelligence. And so now imagine being a multilingual learner and someone who stutters on top of that, just that additional layer is sad, but it also reveals the need to redefine communication.
Definitely agree.
Right? What is communication? And so when we redefine that, fluency may or may not come up.
Yeah, I know. And like, do you see parallels between the experience of being forced to suppress one's home language and experience of people who stutter being pressured to fix or hide their speech?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that there absolutely are those parallels. I think part of it, right, again, goes back to this othering, and so where oftentimes someone speaking another language, at least as we think of it here in the United States, there's also, right, this like phenotype. There is this physical appearance that partners with you speak another language, right? And stuttering, I think, does not always necessarily show up in some type of a physical visual until you hear that person speak. But I think there is an othering, right, that accompanies both of those, of you are not the norm. You are not, right? And I think a lot about it too, because oftentimes, again, here in the United States, we will refer to someone who stutters to a speech and language pathologist. And that word for me, I hadn't never thought about it until we had an opportunity to interview on our podcast Warda. I'm working on saying her name right. I'm gonna do it. Warda Farah, who is a speech and language therapist in the UK. But we use the word pathologist, and pathology is the study of sicknesses or infirmities, right?
Oh,
And
I
so
hear what you're saying.
yeah, because then what we have done again is we've said, well, you're sick, you need to be fixed.
Right.
And we do the same thing with even someone who speaks, for example, African American vernacular English. We'll say, oh, that's broken English. And if something is broken, it needs to be fixed, right? And so again, there's this isolation, there's this othering, and don't speak that way here, right? So you need to think about what you're saying and get it all out in one fluid sentence if you are stuttering, and you need to add that G to the end of your gerunds if you are speaking at school. I am talking and walking, not talking and walking.
No, I
Right?
hear
And
what you're
so
saying.
there's a lot of fixing.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about how ableism plays in all this, all of the work you both are doing, like in terms of respecting languages as you know, as as opposed to being pressured by ableists to sort of to shake yourselves just to be accepted as quote unquote normal. Yeah.
I think part of what makes it challenging, at least from my lens, is like Maurice alluded to earlier, it's somewhat invisible until you hear the person speaking. And same thing with multilingual learners that I work with. I think something we fail to recognize is the cognitive demand that it takes to just function day to day. It takes a tremendous amount of energy for a multilingual learner to be in an environment where they don't understand the language and they have to think about every sound and letter and word that they're going to produce. And I know that for students who stutter, there is a lot of cognitive demand as well. And so I think that is a huge blind spot because we are such an ableist society that we equate that with just needing to be fixed. We pathologize everything. Anything that deviates from the quote unquote norm suddenly needs to be repaired or or pushed, more. But I think that is probably the hardest thing is it's those invisible limitations or whatever we want to call them that really don't allow us to engage in the right conversations about it.
I will say, I feel like on a positive note, right, that there is a shift that is happening. I work with an organization actually through connections with Lissette called Golden Apple. Golden Apple is an organization that prepares pre-service teachers. And so I'm leading this Scholar Institute for rising juniors and seniors in college who are studying to be teachers. And we will spend an entire afternoon out of our 5 days, we'll spend an entire afternoon talking about neurodiversity, right? And so this is something that we are wanting to prepare future teachers for, is to walk in the classroom and have an understanding that neurodiversity does not mean that you have the haves and the have-nots. It does not mean that you have people who can be successful and can't be successful, right? And unfortunately, and I thank goodness we've come a long way, right? Because it used to be that if you had any type of a mental disability or physical disability, you were put in this room over in this part of the school, or maybe even a whole different school, and we're going to hold you until you can get into an adult unit. And now we have a better understanding of that neurodiversity. And so I think that shows up too in terms of language, right? And understanding. We've always said that if you hear somebody speaking English with an accent, you ought to respect them because that means that they speak at least 2 languages,
Okay.
right? Right. So sometimes we hear an accent and we think, oh, well, they don't speak English well. Yeah, but you don't speak their other language at all. Right. And so that idea of being able to honor some of those things, that make us different, how do we honor them? How do we find the asset that exists, right? Because of that, is there further clarity in what I'm saying? If I'm someone who stutters and I'm taking my time now to think about what I'm going to say, is there further clarity actually in that communication than somebody who is just maybe rambling, right? And not taking the time to think clearly about what they are wanting to say.
Definitely. Now, Maurice, you mentioned a previous podcast host of yours, Wada Farah. Now, I listened to that. That podcast was excellent. It was really excellent.
She's fantastic.
Yeah, and she talked about decolonizing the speech language therapy profession, and during the conversation, she said she referenced language violence versus physical violence. Can you elaborate on that?
Ooh, I would love to.
You're
Yeah.
welcome to do it. Feel free. You're welcome to take as much time as you like.
Go ahead, Maurice.
Yeah. So I'll just start with, I think, some of the ways in which I have seen that enacted is through the recent efforts in our country to take words and to completely redefine them and to make them into something that is evil, right, versus something that is set out for good. And so I'll use it like from that whole language perspective, where we have had expressions like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and people have taken that DEI and they've said, well, it is being unfair to a majority group, and that is a way without having to be physically violent. It is a way to oppress. It is a way to again other. It is a way to isolate. It is a way to make people feel weak without needing to do any type of physical violence. It has created a space that is hostile towards people who are thought of as DEI, right? And so I think in that same way, when we take language that people are using, that they are loved in, that they're nurtured in, and we assign moral characteristics to that language,
Or right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
We are creating a situation where violence can take place, right? Where again, I don't have to put my hand on you, but I have now made you feel less than by saying out loud in front of the class, we don't say fixin' to, it's I'm going to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But my mother says fixin' to, my grandmother says fixin' to. And these are people that love me, and these are people who I honor and I respect, and you've just made it into something that is
A negative.
negative,
Yeah,
you know?
definitely. Yeah. It definitely is a challenge to get people to to honor and respect dialects, accents, disability, and I think that it is a definite challenge. Yeah. So now, what what are your thoughts now about this quote? This is the quote that you mentioned. I think Mo said, "To live as a person who stutters is to often carry a double vision." And not only only a person who stutters. This is also includes people who are different, considered different. The belief in one's right to speak freely and the internalized fear that fluent speech is the only speech worth hearing. This contradiction is not a personal failure. It is the echo of ableist norms whispering that to be heard, we must first be fixed.
Yeah. So I immediately, when I think about that double vision, W.E.B. Du Bois, of course, was a sociologist, early or late 19th century, early 20th century, was part of the group that founded the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and a prolific writer. He wrote in his book, The Souls of Black Folks, he talked about this veil that existed between being Black in America and living in that world. Now, again, this is early 20th century, and then also needing to know how to live and exist in the world where they were interacting with white Americans. And so that it really was this double consciousness, is how he referred to it. Is man, I'm fully aware of how I need to act and be and exist over here to survive, and then here's who who I really want to be, and here's where I'm facing, some other pieces. And so when I read that quote, I thought a lot about that idea of what it is like to have great ideas and feel like you can't share them because that's not your place in the world, is to share them. I listened the other day. Here comes my NPR nerd quote. I haven't mentioned NPR in this interview.
By the way, we love NPR, support NPR. We want to fund NPR,
Fund them.
Yes, PBS, fund them, NPR, public television. I would not be who I am without Mr. Rogers, and I was a WTTW PBS kid. Okay?
Yes.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I was just going to say, so they have the Moth Radio Hour, and, it's people at the Moth giving these speeches. They're telling these stories, right? And they had a person on there who stuttered, and he got up on the Moth stage and told this incredible story and stuttered while he was telling the story. And it did not take away from the great impact of this story. In fact, it added to it because that was partially what the story was about, right? And it had humor, and it had, comedic timing, and it had all of these different pieces. And I thought about how many of those stories are left untold.
So true. It's sad.
Which is why, sorry, I was going to say, which is why I tried to allude that we need to redefine communication for that very reason. There are some voices that are not surfacing to the top because we have a very rigid view on communication. And just to put in my shameless plug, there's a film, I don't know if you've seen it, My Beautiful Stutter.
I loved it. Love it.
Phenomenal. I recommend it to all the listeners. If you can, if you have it, you can find it streaming online. Again, it is My Beautiful Stutter, and it really broadens, I think, your perspective on language as a whole. It really left a lasting impact.
Definitely. Now, what gives you both hope when you think about the next generation of bilingual, bicultural youth? What gives you hope?
I love how bold they are. I love how brave. I think young people historically, right, have always pushed, I think, democracy forward. I hope it continues to be that case, but they're bold. I think we're starting to really, I see some more spaces created for neurodiversity and, similar interests, and just, I think they're very bold and they like what they like. And I think part of it is because of the explosion of the internet, and they can make friends and have interests from all over the world. So I think that's pretty awesome and exciting.
Yeah, that was, I think, part of what I was going to mention, Lissette, is that there actually is an ability at this point, I think, to really break down some of those barriers that have previously existed. It's oftentimes self-imposed, but they were real, right? We felt like if I was Black, I have to be kind of fit into this box. If I'm white suburban, I have to fit into this box. If I am Latino in California, Southern Cal, I got to fit into this box. And with that spread of the internet, there is that ability to I can connect with people because I like Star Wars. And, if I like Star Wars, I can find other people that look like me or don't look like me or speak my language or don't speak my language, but we all like Star Wars. That's dope. How can we, really use the moral arc of Star Wars to think about how we are moving forward in the world, right? And who's Darth Vader and how do we get rid of him? Okay, and all of those different pieces, or maybe we can help Darth Vader.
I was going to say, can we help him, please?
Yeah, he needs some help. But I do think I do think that the other piece that really inspires me is that I think that there is a knowledge of and an ability to speak about those emotions that I don't know has always existed. That ability to say, hey, here's how I'm feeling. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling upset. And I'm going to address it through this way. And then I'm going to continue to work to get better, right? I think that ability to do some self-work, we talked about, self-care at the beginning, that ability to do that will be important as we continue to progress.
Mm-hmm. What fuels your passion for the work that you both do, the advocacy work? I mean, that what fuels the passion?
Um, my blessing and curse, or my Achilles heel, has always been justice, right? If anything, even as a child, if I felt like something was unfair, I'm the typical middle child, right? Like fighting for the underdog. But I, growing up, saw my parents struggle a lot because they didn't speak English and they were here as immigrants, and they're brilliant people. And I remember as I started to get older, I started to question this idea of like, if you just work hard, you will be successful. And my parents were working extremely hard and were not having the success, right, that you expect to see. So I think just seeing their lived experiences and advocating for equitable education, because it's so vastly changed my life, it makes me feel now like their sacrifices and coming to this country as undocumented immigrants was really worth it, because education really was the great equalizer in my life. And so just this work is kind of saying, hey, mom and dad, this was worth it. And thank you for all your hard work and your sacrifices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me, there are two pieces. One part is very much so that personal piece, and I actually reference this in the book. Just that idea that I looked around many of my AP classes, and I was the only person of color in the class, or I was one of very few. And I thought to myself, okay, for whatever reason, I have found a way to be successful in this system that has not produced success in some of my peers and some of the kids growing up in my neighborhood. And so I wanted to be a part of producing a system that would be more equitable. I think the other piece, and probably really a strong foundation, is my faith. I think, and of course, I don't always put this in my bio for education, but I also serve as the assistant pastor at my church, because I was like, I'm not busy enough. What else could I do? Actually, I did that before a lot of this other stuff. So I've been the assistant pastor since my early 20s.
And he's come back a lot, which I'm proud of.
Yeah.
My view, and I believe it's a scriptural view of Jesus, is one who came and he said, I've come to preach the gospel to the poor. I've come to set at liberty the captives. I've come to mend the brokenhearted. And so for me, I think a lot about even there's a selection of scripture in which Jesus says, like, hey, when you visited those people in prison and in the hospital and you fed the hungry and you gave drink to the thirsty, when you did that to the least of these, you did it unto me. And so there is absolutely a foundational piece of this work that I do that is about being able to bring some good news to the poor and being able to set at liberty the captives and to look to be an advocate for the oppressed. And I think that aligns with my faith much more than some of the things that I see in this lens of Christian nationalism. And so
education can do that.
Yes. Yeah. And education is a great space to be able to advocate for those who otherwise are voiceless.
Now, and any last words you'd like to share with our listeners before we close today?
I'm gonna let Maurice close this out because he's always that person that will leave you with this like one quote. You're so quotable, Maurice. Okay, so I'll start off by saying that I hope that the listeners walk away with a new little nugget, and I also hope that you learned a little bit something. Or maybe we should just be on NPR because we hope that you learned something new today.
Yeah, I will just say I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to engage in this conversation, and if full transparency, I don't think I had thought about stuttering as part of the work that we had done until just recent. We were having some conversations about it, and we were like, "Yo, we have to do another book because there's a whole bunch of stuff that we haven't really hit yet." And so I appreciate the invitation, and I hope that folk walk away today having listened to this and understanding just again that it cost very little to be kind. Right, like ultimately there's part of what we're talking about. There's systems and things that we are needing to dismantle, and things that we need to build, and understandings we need to build, but on a human to human level, to be patient, to be kind, to be open, to listen. Those are things that we get to choose to do each and every day. And so I hope that as people continue to listen to your podcast, that's something that they're walking away with.
Thanks a lot.